Hi everybody. So I'm gonna show you a couple quick tutorials for editing your photos, just simple edits that will make them a little bit better. So here I have a food photo that I took for our food photo prompt this week of some Brussels sprouts. And you can see that it's a little dark in my kitchen, so I'm going to make some adjustments that enhance the brights and the mid-tones of my photo. That's a little more sophisticated than simply using the exposure slider or the curves slider. So first what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on the photo layer where the three dots are, and I'm going to duplicate this layer. In my copy, you don't have to rename it if you'll remember, but I'm going to rename this highlights, and I'm going to close that, and then I'm going to add an adjustment just to this layer. Adjustment, curves, and I'm going to take the curve slider and double click to add a point, and I'm just going to bump it up quite a bit and apply. Now within this layer here, I'm going to mask out the areas that I want to go back to their neutral spot. So I'm going to take my mask with the scissors option and then draw a mask with the paintbrush. And I'm going to add to mask with a completely soft brush at 100% and a fairly large size to start. So I'm first looking at the highlights of my image, and the brightest parts in this image are the white stems of the Brussels sprouts here, but I also have this sheen of water on the top of the Brussels sprout on this side. So what I'm going to do is, with a large brush, I'm going to mask out everything that was not part of the highlights, because I'm just looking at bringing up the highlights within this layer, and I'm going to mask out everything else so that it reveals the original colors underneath. So one cool feature with Photoshop that we don't have available in Pixlr is the ability to see where our mask is in that small little thumbnail, if you can recall, that existed to the right of the image thumbnail on your layers panel. So that's the only thing that makes this step a little bit trickier. But we do have the temporary color kind of sheen that you're seeing here. So when I let go of my cursor, I've now masked out all of the highlighted curve that was midtones and shadows to reveal them as the original values underneath. And we can check what this looks like by turning the check layer off and on again. So you can see there in those highlighted parts the difference that those make. And I might even want to have reversed that mask in my Photoshop. And I've found this function only recently in Pixlr. If you click on those three dots and choose invert mask, it will go to the reverse function. So now it is adding the background to be brighter and leaving these to be the midtones. So sounds a little confusing, but your masking is what you're doing where you're hiding parts of this layer to reveal the parts underneath. So if I go back and invert mask again, you can see that and it actually does show you in that little thumbnail to the side what you have masked out. So it has masked out this Brussels sprout from being brighter, this whole entire center one, and this highlight from being brighter on that curves layer. So I can play around with that and think, okay, what do I like better? And then I can actually go and add a second a second layer where I adjust the curve again, but this time bring up the shadows to bring back some information in the shadows. So I'm going to click that background layer and duplicate again. And I'm going to right click and I'm going to rename this one shadows. So within this layer, I'm going to apply that curves adjustment again. So I'm going to go adjustment, curves, and this time I'm going to double click towards the bottom, and the bottom left of your curves is where your shadows would exist in your histogram. Now, Pixlr doesn't make this as easy to see, but if I bring up this part, it's bringing up the shadows specifically. Whereas if I brought up this part up top, it's bringing up the highlights too. So I can even double click on this curve and bring my shadow or my highlights and midtones back into kind of a normal range, and then just focus on the shadows. Move this box to the side to see as if I'm bringing back in some information in my shadows. I don't want to go too dramatic because I still am looking for high contrast here. And then I can hit apply when I'm kind of happy with keeping my highlights where they were from that first layer copy, and apply. So now this layer that I've labeled shadows currently has a mask that it's applying down from above. So that's the confusing part here, is if I wanted to go back and say, let's make this one invisible, then my shadows adjustment, I have that completely filled in right now. But now I can really pay attention to what I'm doing within the mask. So when you see all those little squares in your thumbnail to the right, where I'm kind of circling with my cursor, that's showing you that your mask is completely filled in. So everything that you did in that shadow curve is being hidden to reveal what's underneath, which is our original underexposed photo. So now at the top, if I wanted to remove from mask and start to paint back in the areas that I want to be bringing up the lightness of those shadows. Oh, and that was confusing. It should be add to mask. So if you're ever seeing something that doesn't make a difference, then try the other one. Okay, so you can really see now the texture of that cutting board has really been brought up a lot of detail as I'm bringing that back in. Now, I'm going to paint around a little bit, and this is obviously too bright. I'm going to be distracting from what I want to be the focal point, which is the Brussels sprouts. So maybe I just focus on doing this mask for the shadows in the areas surrounding the Brussels sprouts, and I kind of form a sort of vignette. So this technique is known as dodging and burning. There's actually a specific tool for dodging and burning, but that would be a destructive edit. Whereas if I'm doing it in a layer copy, I'm not as destructively editing that image. Now, if my mask is too dramatic, I'm going from one to the other, and I'm not quite happy with it, I can adjust the opacity of my brush. So I'm going to take my opacity of my brush down to 50%, and I'm going to go to remove from mask so that I can soften up that area there, because you notice it's definitely too bright. I'm not seeing the Brussels sprout as distinctly as I want to be. So then I can kind of dot around that edge and maybe pull that back a little bit. And maybe I want to look at the midtones with a smaller brush and pull up those midtones or those shadows of the leaves of that Brussels sprout. And I'm just adding those back in. And you can see in my mask, in my thumbnail there, I'm gradually seeing more of the image appear. And I also think that this part of the shadows was way too dark on this side of the Brussels sprout. So I'm actually going to bring that opacity back up and add those areas back in. Okay, and I can always do an inversion again to see what I think. Whoa, so you can really see where I have painted out. So I'm going to invert that back. And now let's see if my mask, when I turn this layer back on from the top, let's see if I still get those punchy highlights. And I do. So this is a technique that I didn't know was possible in Pixlr until today when I did a little bit more playing around with it. If you really want to make your photos look more three-dimensional and pop, I think it's a great technique to use. It takes a little bit more time, but if you're not looking for something that's a little bit more fake in editing and you're just looking to enhance the natural beauty of your photos like you would be for food photography, then this is a great technique to try. I hope this helps you and that you guys are having fun taking photos at home.